Hi, everyone. In this video, I'm going to review Chapter 10, which is all about alternative organization structures. There's been a lot of literature in the strategic management domain, and for that matter, organizational behavior and organizational dynamics. It simply is an often discussed topic. The reason that it finds its way into strategic management is quite simply way back in military strategy. Armies were organized, and you've probably seen movies or diagrams, but blocks of troops. And each one of them was called a division. Today we have organizational units or groups within corporations called divisions, and that's where the term came from. And how the division was moved around on the battlefield along with artillery and cavalry determined which army won the war. And how all that was orchestrated was the nature of military strategy. So our roots as strategic managers go way back there. And every once in a while, we actually still follow lessons that were learned by commanders way back then. One thing we have learned is that when strategy changes, when there's a major change in strategy, a significant change in the organization structure also is required. And there's research that shows that when those kinds of changes are made, when structure follows strategy, financial results are better than if no change is made. So we need to structure the enterprise so that it is best situated, best able to implement strategy. Organization structure is essentially one of the most important means for implementing strategy. That's why in your projects, I've asked you to take a look at the organization structure and determine whether, among other things in the corporation, the organization structure will need to change as the corporation changes and as the strategy that you seem to discover during your project, as it gets implemented, will the organization have to change to accommodate that strategy? So organization structure is important, not for the same reason that organizational scholars study organization necessarily, but because it's such a vital basic element of strategy implementation. Now, your chapter 10, isn't very difficult, and it's not very long. It's not a very complete discussion of organizational dynamics in strategic management. But the one thing that it does is simply run through the basic structures of organization, how they're structured, why they're structured the way they are. So let's take a look at those. We can run through this chapter, I think, fairly quickly. And then when you do your project, identify the type of organization structure that you seem to see in the company you're studying. And again, ask yourself and tell me whether the organization structure will need to change in order for the strategy to be implemented effectively. Okay, so with that, let me see if I can go through this routine that I usually do to get the PowerPoint slides up. Well, what do you know? It came up faster this time. I must be getting practice at this or something. Okay, so the issues that we're going to be talking about are here on this page. I'm going to talk about essentially the elements of corporate structuring and what the options are. All right. This is a good point that the author begins with. And that is that when you're forming your strategy, you really do need to take adequate time and effort to work through just how the strategy will be implemented. And if and as you do that, you will necessarily come across questions of organization and organization structure. By way of example, if your strategy calls for more ambitious growth in international markets in some part of the world, now you need to ask yourself the question, does the organization have the necessary elements to make that happen? Will we need a new vice president? Will we need to open new offices in some part of the world? When we do that, how will we control those things from corporate headquarters? And again, will we need to add or change some part of the organization structure in order to make that strategy happen? The more complicated, the more strategic change there is. That is to say, the more ways we're going to change strategy, the more difficult, the more complicated the implementation will be, and the more likely we'll have to alter the organization strategy. Okay, this is a slide that I don't want to take too much trouble with. The organization structure simply, it's not just the formal means, it is the actual means by which work is coordinated, and the functions. Remember, when we began, talked about Abel's model, organizations exist to accomplish social purposes, and if they don't, they'll probably stop existing. So the structure is simply the way in which we go about accomplishing the mission, that is doing the corporation's work. There are options, there are alternative structures, and if we choose the right one, it's going to help us to perform that mission a lot better. The author talks about a simple structure where a little business gets started and everybody's involved in doing everything. But over time, new companies grow. We hope they do. They hope they do. And they may grow vertically, which means that additional layers of management are added. That may be necessary as the organization grows geographically, and new units of management are necessary to coordinate the work that is done throughout the enterprise. And it may be that new functions are added too. So perhaps we'll start out as a distributor of products, and pretty much have a sales organization. And one day we decide that we're going to manufacture some of the products that we sell. So the organization grows that way. Very often manufacturers decide to sell the products that they make and manufacture the components of the products that they assemble. And so as those things happen, the organization grows and vertically, as the term is used. Now, as all that's going on, and as departments get larger, you know, instead of one in the very beginnings of a corporation, you might have a bookkeeper. Later on, the bookkeeper becomes the accounting manager because there are a couple of accountants hired. Maybe one handles all the sales and shipping functions. The other handles accounts receivable, inventory, and payables. And then as time goes on, the organization gets bigger and the accounting manager becomes the controller. And you've got accounting managers responsible for the accounts payable and receivable, inventory accounting, tax accounting, and so forth. And so this accounting organization is growing vertically. There are more bosses and there are more employees. That's vertical growth. And the number of employees in a particular department or unit represents the manager's span of control. And there has been a lot of literature over the years about what the maximum span of control is before inefficiencies get involved. Today, we have a lot of tools that didn't exist when that literature was written, not least of which is the computer and lots of online coordination tools. And so, whereas in the old days we had these great big tall organizations, now they've come down, they've become flatter, and one manager can handle a lot more things that are going on and a lot more people because he or she can coordinate with them much more easily than in the old days when they virtually had to get up and go see them. So the flat organization doesn't have as many of these units, as many people at different levels, but instead has fewer people and today probably, or sorry, fewer levels, and usually lots of integration through electronics. Now there, of course, is another reason for organizations to be flat. Some industries just don't have tall organizations. Think of a law firm or an accounting firm. I used to work for Pete Marwick Mitchell, which is now called KPMG. And everybody pretty much knew everybody in the office that I was in, and we knew the regional organization too pretty well, because basically there were accountants at one level and consultants at another group, which is the one I was in. There were managers and partners. That was it. There were managing partners too, but basically there were not many levels in the organization. And so by definition, they were pretty flat. On the other hand, if you've got a manufacturing organization with all the different functions that have to go into creating the parts, quality control, assembly, and packaging and delivery and so forth, then the organization can get a lot taller because it's got a lot more functions. Okay, the next slide talks about concepts that I think you're already pretty familiar with. That is centralization and decentralization. Some organizations simply are highly centralized. And we'll deal with that topic in a couple of slides from now again. But in some corporations, especially where they don't have a lot of divisions, then the command and control, the authority resides at the top and with senior executives. On the other hand, decentralization occurs when strategic and operating decisions are made by managers underneath that top level. That could be because there are several divisions or business units. I added that comment on this slide because the author did not. But it's not necessarily simply delegating responsibilities down inside the organization. It may be that the organization becomes so spread out that there's no alternative but to decentralize. Okay, horizontal growth refers to an organization chart or an organization structure that has perhaps 2 or 3 divisions because it makes 2 or 3 different kinds of product perhaps. And an acquisition is made to buy a business that makes another kind of product. So there will be horizontal growth in that case, a broader scope of activities conducted by the corporation. Sometimes corporations decide to take into their structure functions that had been purchased by outsiders. It could be some form of advertising and marketing. Instead of hiring a marketing agency, the marketing vice president says, look, we can do this stuff ourselves. Let me build a marketing organization that has advertising and media and so forth. And so the scope of the organization broadens out horizontally. More often than not today, it's going the other way, and we're taking functions that are not critical to the mission of an enterprise and outsourcing them. So that's horizontal reduction. Anyway, downsizing occurs when we find ways to do without functions. And this is occurring more often because the capabilities of IT, pardon me, I was drinking some tea to moisten my throat, but automation and robotics, high level artificial intelligence just enables the corporation to do functions or to get along without functions and the managers that used to perform them. So you can see on this slide, there's a little picture of a guy walking out of the office with his belongings. He's obviously been the result of a downsizing move. So we now get into what is probably the meat of the chapter, and that is the 4 basic types of organization structure. I say basic because if this were my MBA course, we would deal with a few other types of organization structure. But these are the basic ones. Function, which is just the way it sounds. We have a manufacturing department, a marketing department, an accounting department, and so forth. That's the structure of some companies that are just in one line of business. And it also is the structure of divisions, comprehensive division, fully formed divisions that are subsidiaries of corporations with multiple divisions. And so lo and behold, we see product division structure. And so several corporations make more than one kind of product. And so they have different divisions for each of those products. And very possibly each of those divisions will have a functional structure. But now we've got a broader horizontal development with multiple divisions. Next is the geographic structure. McDonald's is organized geographically. It just becomes a whole lot easier to manage that great, big, complicated, diffuse organization through geographic management. But retail organizations will often organize geographically because products that are demanded in the South, by way of example, are not the same as those that are demanded in the North. It's hard to sell snowshoes in Hawaii, and it's hard to sell bikinis in Alaska. So you gotta organize geographically to respond appropriately to the demand in different locations. And finally, the matrix structure, and it's really not discussed very well at all. I probably should have made a couple of diagrams to show you, but just recognize that some industries, for instance, construction, big construction corporations, first of all, those corporations have the functional organization that we were just talking about: marketing, operations, engineering, divisions that are just focused on types of machinery that go into construction versus agriculture versus logging and timber harvesting and so forth. So you can imagine a large construction firm with lots of functional vice presidents. However, we also have field operations, and these field operations differ greatly in the kind of skills they require. The kind of project that is involved in construction and fabrication is different from earth moving and so forth. So large construction firms, and I've been involved with a couple of them, very large ones. One in particular, Foster Wheeler in New Jersey, which was worldwide, and among other things, constructed electric power plants, petroleum refineries, chemical plants, and the variety of other types of structure. And so those types of project differed to the point where we had to have different types of managers in charge of each of those project divisions. And those divisions did projects to build different kinds of buildings. But you can't ask a guy who's good at building nuclear power plants to suddenly go out and build a water treatment plant. So these folks become specialized. So now you've got functional management down here: accounting, cost accounting, finance, engineering, and so forth. And you got these projects coming across, and they're being affected by these functional managers, as well as their own specialized managers. Now, that's a two-dimensional matrix, but just imagine what happens when we take into account the geographic division. So, you know, the way we do these projects and our ability to do these projects in China will be a whole lot different than in Europe and the United States and South America and so forth. So it's possible to have a three-dimensional matrix. And you can imagine the problems that I'm trying to suggest to you. Coordinating these things is just difficult as hell. It's just awkward. The administrative burden to coordinate a matrix organization is substantial, and yet there are many industries, there are several industries where matrix structure is essentially your only option. So here's the functional structure. As the author points out, it's common to new organizations. It emphasizes specialization of the function. The financial function has its specialized requirements. The HR department has its specialized requirements, marketing, and so forth. So each one of these functions within the organization specializes on the skills and techniques and human resources that are required to perform those functions. That's a functional structure, and it exists either in a company that is engaged in only one line of business or a division, a subsidiary of a corporation that has many divisions and or subsidiaries. So let me get another drink of tea here. As you can see from the window behind me, it's nighttime when I'm recording this. So I've quit drinking coffee and I'm now drinking tea. The problem with tea is that it still makes your mouth sort of dry, and it's not as easy to do these recordings when I'm drinking tea as when I'm drinking a nice rich cup of coffee with cream in it. Anyway, that's got nothing to do with this review. The product division is a common structure, and very often companies make more than one type of product. If we think about Deere and Company, it makes agricultural equipment, it makes construction equipment like we talked about a moment ago, and it makes logging equipment. It also makes consumer products that are used to trim your yard at home or even golf courses. So it's got quite a variety of products, and it has divisions that are focused on these products. Some corporations like General Electric have very broad divisions, medical products, IT products, appliance products, and so forth. And so they have to have product divisions because you really can't organize a company like that any other way. And each one of those divisions will probably be set up as a functional division and conduct almost all of the functions of a standalone corporation, but get the assistance and benefit of corporate resources such as tax accounting, some engineering, legal, government relations, and so forth. These, as the slide points out, this structure certainly does make it possible to assess the profitability of product lines and the effectiveness of the managers of those divisions, those product divisions. Here's the geographic division structure. I mentioned that food service companies often have geographic divisions because tastes differ. And if a corporation is multinational in nature, then you can imagine how there would be a region for North America, a region for Europe, a region for Asia, and so forth. And those regions well might have divisions within them, and that is often the case. So so as the slide says, it's attractive when there are substantial differences in geographic regions. So some food companies also are organized regionally because tastes in different parts of the world differ a great deal. Now we have the matrix structure, and you can see that there's no diagram here. That's a shame, and it's a shame that I didn't think of putting a diagram for you here because I have several. So shame on me. But as I explained earlier, this is a corporation that has functions at the corporate level that oversee everything. But they really can't tell what the manager or the president of the construction division or the fabrication division. Some construction companies make their own machinery, by the way, or what's called the erection division, which is the division that puts up assembles the great big building. So the president of those divisions is in charge as well. And as I mentioned earlier, another level of complexity could be geographic. But at a minimum, whoever is out there in the field, in the world doing this work, as a boss. It could be the project accounting manager, perhaps. The accounting manager takes orders from corporate accounting management and takes orders from the president of that division because it might need to develop financial statements so that greater insight into products or projects or clients is required. And so managers, marketing managers, operating managers, equipment managers, even financial managers usually have and receive instructions from 2 or more bosses. And that makes life real complicated. On the other hand, there are times when that's the best organization to choose. Again, large construction companies are the ones that are most familiar to me, but in my travels as a consultant, I've seen many other. These things exist. I can tell you that there are stories or cases where corporations try the matrix structure because it seems to be the most logical, and later on dissolve it, go back to another structure because it's just so complicated. Okay, so the functional product division, geographic division, and matrix are pure forms. But as the author points out, they're often combined in real life. Although these structures that we've just reviewed do exist in real life often, typically. But when you get in to look at a corporation that has grown through acquisitions and mergers and what have you, then vestiges of different organization structures may survive, and you get something that has its own description. sort of hard to work in those organizations. Okay, so there's a list of considerations here that you should make when selecting a structure. They involve such things as the extent of corporate involvement, how many hierarchical levels there'll be, and so forth. I'll simply let you review this list and particularly with regard to the project that you're doing. When you look at the company's organization structure, does it have the right structure? Will it have to modify its structure in the future, perhaps because of some of these issues? Okay, corporate involvement in business unit operations. When they, we're always going to have this top level, whether it's in a functional product division, geographic division, or matrix. You know, corporate management's going to be involved. The real question is, to what extent? And I've been in organizations where the extent has been heavy and where it's been light. When it's heavy, that can create some serious problems. Whoever is at top management, and it's not just the CEO in this case, but it's the top management team. Well, the top management team has to be respected, and it helps if they're fairly well liked, if they can negotiate with divisions and personnel in the organization. If they're argumentative, dictatorial, and so forth, you can sort of imagine what happens. The division managers, the department managers who are really good, they have pride and self-respect. And so they may leave the organization and go elsewhere. On the other hand, there are some, the literature is full of of stories about excellent executives who are able somehow to coordinate and encourage and develop division managers. And of course, that works out very well. On the other hand, we seem to be moving in the direction of delegation, where more often managers come out of business schools, they have experience, they have knowledge, they're pretty sophisticated, and they want to do their own thing. So if they get too much direction, as I said, even if it's not because the senior executives are offensive, dictatorial or otherwise, it's just that those managers aren't comfortable because they've got too many limitations on them. And so we have to delegate and develop a flatter organization where managers have the ability to do more on their own. And there, of course, you have a risk, because if they're doing things on their own, every once in a while, the corporate executives are going to get an unhappy surprise. So we have the issue of restructuring. Restructuring is just what it sounds like. Something will happen. Perhaps a competitor will launch a successful new product that changes the industry, maybe even revolutionizes it. Maybe something will go wrong internally. Perhaps the folks who are managing a division just aren't up to the task. Perhaps the corporation becomes short of cash for reasons that are not attributable to a particular division, and yet restructuring will have to happen in order to get the organization slimmer, using less cash so that it can rebuild its cash, pay down its debt, and so forth. All of those are situations where the corporation may have to be restructured. That can be, as you might imagine, stressful for the people in the organization. But it involves realigning, reducing perhaps cash available to executives. It could be acquiring new business units, but when we use the term restructuring, we often refer to divesting, that is, selling business units. So in my consulting firm, after a corporate plan was prepared, it became obvious that one division just wasn't going to be as important as it used to be, or it's not going to be necessary to accomplish the mission and the new strategy. And so our firm sometimes was asked to sell that division. The last bullet here is the author's comment that says decisions for restructuring shouldn't be delayed until survival is at risk. And of course, that's exactly why we do strategic planning. We're at just about the end of this review. At the very end of the chapter, the author talks about electronic commerce as a new element of corporate organization. And you don't need to look at this diagram. You can read it just as easily as I can. But the point is that many traditional firms are integrating their e-commerce into existing business models. So they have clicks and bricks. I hate that. But they have e-commerce units that do marketing, that sell products. In the world of finance, they may actually make the product and sell it. So in some industries that you're probably more familiar with than I am, because I'm an old man, there are a lot of industries that revolve around electronics and are essentially electronic in nature, but lots of others. Walmart's an example. Walmart is now opening an e-commerce division, right? You can place the order electronically, go pick it up, they'll deliver it to you, and so forth. And yet you can also go to the Walmart stores. And so you've got the conventional classic organization structure, and you've also got an e-commerce element of that structure as well. Frankly, in my view, it's just another division. It's another, it could even be a subsidiary, but I think it's a division. Now, how you manage it gets you back into this matrix thing, because you've got all these products and all these functions that are being managed by the corporation, and you've got the retail stores, and then you've got the e-tail stores. And so you've got a more complex organization structure now, and these functions interact with each other. They're not perfectly separated. So where does the inventory come from to fill the order of an e-commerce order that somebody's going to pick up later today? Well, it comes from the inventory in that store, right? And that inventory is no longer available for the person who walks in the store, which means that the person who's involved in inventory control and purchasing has a lot more to do than they used to. But nevertheless, I view electronic commerce in many respects in the same way that I look at a matrix organization. That's not in your textbook. There won't be any quiz on that particular concept, but I don't know, maybe there should be. So with that, we're done with this review. It's important just to use this opportunity to remind you that you need to do a good organizational review of the current business and the business that is contemplated in a strategic plan as the strategy gets implemented. What organizational changes will be required to implement that strategy? And with that, I'm not going to waste your time any longer. I'm going to try to find the right button here. And hope that I get it right. And I'll just say goodbye to you. Look forward to seeing you in the classroom. Goodbye.